Warning, this guide will feature full spoilers for the first trial in the 7.0 expansion for Final Fantasy XIV, Dawntrail. Hi guys, and welcome to a Hector lecture guide to the fight Worqor Lar Dor Extreme. This is Valigarmanda. For this fight, before you begin, you want to assign light parties that should have a tank, 2 DPS, and a healer in each. You're also going to need partners. I recommend tanks with melees, healers with ranged. You're going to need set positions for these partners. One for an out, one for a cone, and one for a donut. Finally, some groups are going to use spread positions. This guide is going to instead rely on YOLO spreads, but set spread positions are a perfectly valid way of dealing with this fight as well. There are 3 mechanics you're going to need to recognize from normal mode. When you see the text say Valigarmanda gathers its strength, the boss turns orange and sort of leans over the stage, this is an out. When it says blinding energies build within Valigarmanda's wide open beak and you see the mouth wide open, it's a cone. Finally, if you see the boss spinning around the arena and it says a tempestuous wind surrounds Valigarmanda, that's a donut. The first mechanic of the fight is called Spikesicle. You're going to start to see some telegraphs for line AoEs. Pay attention to the second AoE. Whichever side it went to, my recommended way to dodge this whole mechanic is to hug the wall in the middle on that side. You're going to get 10 total telegraphs of line AoEs. While these go off, they're also going to position some icicles that will explode in a point-blank AoE. We're going to make this dodge simple. Once they start going off at the actual line AoEs, after 2 of them, start to move across towards the opposite side of the middle arrow of the hitbox. After 2 of these big explosions, go to the top of the arrow in the hitbox. You can now wait there for the rest of the mechanic. Regardless of how this works, this dodge will always work. The boss will now cast Sky Ruin. This is going to be a heavy-hitting raid-wide with a bleed that also is a phase transition. This will always first transition into Fire phase. After the raid-wide goes off, you'll be in a brand new arena with some volcanoes on the side. The boss will cast Tri-Scorch, which is both raid-wide damage and also gives players 3 different debuffs. We will talk about these debuffs later when they actually apply. First, you're going to see the text saying a volcanic eruption is imminent, and one of the 2 volcanoes on the side of the screen is going to erupt. Turn your camera to figure out which one is exploding, and run opposite it. Shortly afterwards, you get a persistent AoE that's going to last for a couple seconds, so don't walk back into it too quickly. Puddles are going to appear under certain players, so just make sure you stay mobile. There's 2 sets of puddles. The boss will now do one of its characteristic telegraphs. In this case, it's the out. And during Fire phase, these will always come immediately afterwards with partner stacks. So 4 AoEs targeting either all tank healers and all DPS that should be soaked by 2 players. Just make sure you go to your pre-assigned partner positions while dodging the attack. We now get our first of the debuffs going off. 4 of the players, either all tank healers or all DPS, will have an ice debuff, and just like in normal mode, you just need to make sure that you are still moving when this finishes, and for about 2 seconds afterwards until the debuff expires. Now the boss is going to cast Mountain Fire, and this is going to spawn a Tank Buster tower in the north. This Tank Buster has 6 separate hits that need to be soaked, but each hit gives both a short Vuln and a dot. The Vuln means that you need to do a tank swap, and the dot means that you can't cheese the swap with Invuln, as the dot will kill you shortly after Invuln falls off. Instead, each of the 6 hits is going to have to be taken by alternating main tank, then off tank. For the first hit, have your main tank go in and everybody else hide behind the main tank, because when this hit happens, almost the entire arena gets cleaved except for directly behind the tank. Off tank will hop in the tower, and the boss is going to shift to either the left or the right side. The whole party needs to now shimmy across so that the tank in the tower is in between Valigarmanda and the party. This is going to continue for 6 hits. Each time the tanks need to swap, and the party needs to adjust over so that they are directly behind the tank relative to where the boss is. Valigarmanda will always move, but which position they move towards is entirely random, so you just need to adjust on the fly for all 6 hits. At the end of this, we're now going to get our fire debuff going off. The healers are marked with a fire marker that is going to signify light party stacks. There will be 3 hits, each one leaving a fire puddle. There are a number of different ways to be able to deal with this. You just need to have a set place where your healers are going to start and the party's going to meet them. I have the healers going to C and D with the party stacking together there, and we're just going to walk forward for the 3 hits. Make sure you heal and mitigate this significantly because it hits very hard. After all 3 hits go off, make sure you move out of the puddle so you don't get a dot from staying in it too long. And now the second 4 players. Whoever did not have ice before, they will now have ice. They need to make sure they're moving just like before. We get another volcanic eruption to dodge. We get another tell from the boss that needs to be solved in pairs, so make sure you dodge, but also with your partner. And finally, this will finish off with every player getting targeted with a lightning spread. Just make sure you're slightly far away from each other. You don't have to be in set positions, but you can stick to set spread positions if you prefer. These hit with a little bit of damage, but not tons. Finally, group up together because the boss is going to cast a heavy raid-wide disaster zone. This will transition the stage back towards how it was at the beginning of the fight. Disaster zone is followed by another raid-wide ruin foretold. Heal up and mitigate for this, and you're going to get 3 beacons spawning, just like you saw in normal mode. This is now going to play out very similar to the ad phase in normal mode with one major difference. Instead of 1 line stack, it's 2 line stacks, and these are wild charges. That means that the player who is in front or nearest to the boss takes heavier damage, so this needs to always be the tank, or another non-tank player is going to get killed by the first hit. I recommend starting by targeting the 2 beacons on the outside, so group 1 targets the beacon on the left and group 2 targets the beacon on the right. Take the line stacks, and then adjust into the new safe spots from the conal AoEs on the ground. This will continue for several hits, with each line stack doing more damage. You need to have lots of healing and mitigation ready to support your team through this. This will continue either until you destroy all 3 beacons, the group wipes from damage, or the boss is filling up ruinous power during this time. If that bar gets to 100, it will be an enrage. The boss will now cast its ultimate attack, Tula Disaster. This is 3 consecutive raid-wide hits that hit quite hard with a lot of time in between them. It's very important that you delay your mitigation so that it hits the final hit, as this one's going to leave you with a dot that will persist for the rest of the fight. The boss will now cast Sky Ruin, and is going to transition to either the Thunder phase or the Ice phase. It's random which one you get first. I'm going to show you the Thunder phase first. Sky Ruin again hits with a hard raid-wide, as well as a dot. The stage will transition into the Thunder mode that you've seen from normal mode. Boss will cast Tri-Scourge. This is another raid-wide that gives you a set of debuffs. The major difference is that the light party stack will only hit once this time, and now Ice requires you to be floating on one of the levitating squares. First we get the fire stacks. Go to whichever pre-assigned position your group has decided, take them together. Make sure when you take those stacks that either all players are either floating or all players are on the ground. Hail of Feathers is next. This is a set of proximity markers that are going to start on either the left or the right side and then start to do a circle around the stage. You need to make sure you're as far away from these as possible. There will be 6 total proximity AoEs that go off. Each one will hit with a raid-wide that does damage based on how close you are to the feather that drops, so keep your distance and heal and mitigate. As these feathers drop, you'll notice that they're actually targetable. As soon as possible, we need to start attacking the first one or the second one that drops because we need to destroy one in short time. As long as one of the feathers is dead before Blighted Bolt finishes its cast, you'll be fine. This will target each of the feathers with an AoE that's going to cover the whole tile, so we needed to destroy one feather to give ourselves a safe tile. Now spread out loosely, because you're going to see that all of one roll are targeted with an Ice debuff, all of one roll are targeted with a Thunder debuff. The Thunders are spreads like before, but the Ice debuff need to be floating, and they need to be away from each other, because if 2 icicles are dropped too close to each other, they tether and explode. Simply put, everybody needs their own square. Thunders should be on a grounded tile, Ice should be on a floating tile. As long as you're spread following those rules, everything will be fine. The boss will now do one of its characteristic telegraphs. This is the cone. Unlike in Fire Phase, where we needed to be in our partners, this time there's a delayed AoE dropped underneath every player's position, so move after the attack. We now get Thunderous Breath. Thunderous Breath is going to spawn 5 of these pink circles and targets a cone that covers the whole stage. The only way to dodge it is to be on a levitating square. If you look closely at the pink circles, you'll see that there is a lane that is not about to get hit. In this case, it's the 4th lane from the boss. Go to that lane and make sure you're on a floating tile. We now get the same mechanic as before, but with the rolls reversed. Solve it exactly the same as I showed before. Another characteristic telegraph AoE from the boss. This time it's the out. And once again, move because it's Thunder Phase, and there's the delayed AoEs afterwards. Disaster Zone is a raid-wide that's going to transition the stage back towards its original version. But before the Thunder Phase is entirely done, we have one more mechanic, and it's a tank buster that we've already seen in normal mode, Ruinfall. I recommend you just have every player pop knockback immunity so you can entirely ignore it, and the tanks just need to soak the tower together with cooldowns. We now get Sky Ruin, and you're going to get the phase you didn't get first. So since we had Thunder first, we're going to have Ice second. It's another raid wide with a dot, followed by Tri-Scourge for more raid wide damage. The debuffs that appear this time are slightly different. The fire is a 3-person stack, and the ice is now a giant AoE, a defamation that will target both tanks. We get the fire and the ice first. Simply have your light parties minus the tanks go to their same spots they've went for every other light party stack, and have the tanks go far away from the party. When this resolves, you get a little bit of damage, but everybody survives. A rumbling avalanche approaches from the southeast. Make sure you dodge this just like in normal mode by adjusting to the safe side, and shortly after this you're going to get a telegraph of a characteristic boss AoE. This time it's the out. Dodge both the avalanche and the out at the same time. For all of Ice phase, the boss's telegraphs are going to come now with these Ice Star AoEs. This might look complicated at first, but there's a very simple pattern. Find the northern AoE, dodge to the opposite side. If it's on the left, the safe spot is always going to be just about here on the right side. You can use the 1 in 4 waymark as a guide, it's roughly in between them. Afterwards, spread loosely, because one roll is going to have thunder spreads. Just make sure that you're not stood directly on top of each other's. These don't hit very hard, and they're not very large. We now have Spikesicle. This is exactly the same as it appeared the first time, with the sole difference being that there's going to be a landslide in the middle of it. For the most part, you can do the dodge exactly the same as I described at the beginning. Wait until 2 line telegraphs go off and dodge to that side. Wait for the rest of them to go off. Now when the actual line AoEs start. About the second one, after it goes off, you're going to start moving across to the other side of the arrow in the hitbox, and after the first 2 explosions, you can adjust towards the top of the hitbox. Half of the time, this is going to naturally dodge the landslide. Let me show you what I mean. For the landslide that hits on the bottom half, it looks like this, so you can always dodge to the top of the arrow, and it works perfectly. If you happen to get the other landslide, though, you'll see that it covers the top of the arrow. Simply adjust slightly to the left if you get that landslide. If I overlay the AoEs from the exploding icicles, you'll see that none of them actually clip the spot, so there's a lovely safe pixel where you can hang out for the whole end of the fight. We now get a telegraphed AoE from the boss. Here it's the cone, and the ice stars afterwards. Because the ice star AoE in the north is on the right side, everybody's going to adjust over towards the left side. There will be an avalanche immediately after this, but focus on dodging the star AoEs first, then immediately dodge the avalanche. The boss will now cast Freezing Dust. Since this is an ice mechanic, make sure you're moving for a couple seconds after the cast finishes to make sure that you don't get frozen. You get 4 more Thunder AoEs on the roll that hasn't had them yet, so spread. Finally, Disaster Zone is a raid wide that will transition us back to the original stage. To finish off Ice phase, we get a Tank Buster that targets the top 2 players in aggro with a Cleaving AoE Tank Buster. This is aggro-based, not roll-based, so off-tank you need to make sure you're second in aggro, or you're likely going to kill a DPS. All that's left is Wrath Unfurled, which is a raid-wide. We get a repeat of the Mountain Fire Tank Buster, all 6 hits of it, and then another Tool of Disaster. There's 2 raid-wides that are survivable here with healing and mitigation, and then the final hit of Tool of Disaster is going to service this Fights and Rage. And that's everything you need to know. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this useful.